Last week, hello. Well, there is a handout from last week. There isn't? There is. So there's only a few copies left. Well, never mind. On the top of this week's handout, you have the main stuff of last week. And what I said to you last week, to some surprise, to some I think, is that just as it is a dangerous thing to have too low a view of marriage, so it is a dangerous thing to have too high a view of marriage. And where the possibility of too high a view of marriage presents difficulties is that too high a view of marriage, too lofty a view of marriage will make unrealistic expectations the norm. And our contentment level in our marriages, the contentment level of any married couple in their marriage, has to do with the expectations with which they entered that marriage and the expectations with which they continue the marriage. So my intention over these weeks together is for us to strive for a realistic view of marriage, which would be a biblical view of marriage. And that's the title of the course, A Biblical View of Marriage. We looked last week at some aspects of marriage as revealed in the Scriptures, which would lead us towards a realistic view of marriage, that we can look at it in a proper way with neither too low nor too high a view of the place marriage should take up in anyone's life and in any society. So I showed you, and if you can read very small print, you can see for yourself there at the top of the handout, that marriage is God's idea, so that His standards are the ones that matter, since He is God and we are not. Marriage is intended to be a help. Marriage is to be honored, therefore it is honorable. But marriage is temporary, a relationship which ends at death, as the wedding vows, the wedding ceremony says, and a covenant, which has lots of implications, and we'll be looking at them tonight. But what I want to show you from a review of these 5 details of marriage, not a complete list in any way, 5 of the truths that you can glean from Scripture about marriage, is that there ought to be expectations for marriage, not just for one another. A man should not just have expectations of the woman he marries, but should have expectations about marriage itself. And we can draw some conclusions from the work we've already done, and I'd like to do that by completing this sentence that starts with the word since in a number of ways. For starters then, since marriage is a covenant, we should expect there to be rules. Since marriage is a covenant, we should expect there to be rules. There's a number of reasons why the fact of it being a covenant should lead us to expect rules by which it works. For starters, that's what a covenant is. A covenant is a highly conditional contract made before God. Well, you can't make a contract without some sort of contractual obligations, without some sort of contractual details. So we would expect, a covenant being what it is, that there would be obedience involved, that there would be rules to follow. And besides that, a covenant being what it is, marriage is a God-centered or a God-focused arrangement. He invented it. He made marriage what it is. He arranges the marriages that occur as He arranges all the details of life. And God is a rule-setting kind of God. God is a God who has His universe and His people operate according to rules. We read that Scripture is inspired by God, it says in 2 Timothy, and that all the Scripture is profitable for doctrine and for reproof and for correction and for training in righteousness. This is the way God proceeds, by giving us reproof and correction and then training us in righteousness. And the word training is the word that's based on the Greek word for child. So the word training means child raising. The Scriptures are the means by which God raises us His children. And you raise children by rules, by laying down standards and expecting them to be met. So God sets down standards or rules for our behavior, and in marriage is no different. There are rules by which a marriage should work. That's the first implication that we draw from what we've seen already. Now, just as an aside to that, I talked last week about the reality of the fact that the reality of the state of marriage in our society, and it has a lot to do with the way we enter marriage, but besides that, the very facts of marriage is for many people a disappointment. That being the case, we should expect unpopular rules. We should expect the rules to be unpopular. So fill out the second line this way, if you will. Since marriage is a disappointment for some, we should expect unpopular rules. Let me tell you what I'm meaning by that. It would stand to reason that if marriage succeeds or fails by adherence or ignorance of rules, and many people are disappointed in their marriages, it must be that the rules are not very popular. It must be that a lot of people aren't naturally taking to the rules. Otherwise, their marriages would be a success. Otherwise, the marriage would not be such a disappointment. So as I'll lead you through this exercise tonight, and we work towards the actual rules of marriage, I would expect you to react to them as if they are unpopular to the masses and politically incorrect, I'm trying to think of another way to say politically incorrect so as not to overuse that phrase, we should expect the rules to be unpalatable to our society. We should not be surprised if we look at the rules as they're stated and say, that will never work, people will never go for this. It's just because people don't go for this that marriage is, to many people, a disappointment. And then we can go further and say, since marriage is God's idea, we should expect simple rules. Let me explain to you what I mean. Marriage is God's idea, and it's God's idea for all humanity. It is the normal state of adult existence. This is the way the Bible pictures it. That is, singleness is a unique calling, accompanied by unique gifts, whereas marriage is the normal state of life. This is the way God has designed His creation. Well, since marriage is God's idea for all humanity, all periods of history, all classes of society, the rules by which it functions or fails to function ought to be very simple rules. That is, it couldn't be complicated, otherwise it wouldn't transfer from one society to another. So we should be looking for some very simple rules. Not only because marriage is to be universally the normal way of adult living, but also because God in His mercy makes things simple for His children. Jesus spoke of an obligation to commit Him as a yoke. And He said, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. It's not going to be a heavy load to bear. That's in Matthew 11. And in 1 John chapter 5, the apostle follows suit with that and says that we know His commandments, and His commandments are not burdensome. It is not the design of God to weigh us down with impossible obligations. Rather, the rules of God are always very simple. And so we should be looking for some rules which, though unpopular, are not complicated. And then fourthly, 1, 2, 3, 4, yes, since marriage is intended to be a help to us, since marriage is intended to help, we should expect, synergistic rules. Synergistic rules. S-Y-N-E-R-G. S-Y-N-E-R-G-I-S-T-I-C. Synergistic. Synergism means 1 + 1 = 3. That when you put things together, the sum is greater than the individual sum of the individual parts. When things fit together, they accomplish more than they would on their own. Since marriage is intended to help people get on with the will of God, it must be such that the rules produce an effect which makes the sum total greater than it would be individually. I mean, take a man and what he's capable of accomplishing on his own, take a woman and what she's able to accomplish on her own, bring them together and bind them by some simple rules, and it should be that they're now, following the rules, able to do more together than they would do alone, accomplish more in their life together than alone. Well, they've got rules to keep that they didn't have before, so it must be that the keeping of the rules makes them into greater people than they were before, so that the rules don't, the keeping of the rules and the marriage itself doesn't finish them behind where they started, but ahead of where they started. Otherwise, no work would be accomplished and marriage would not help. So since marriage is intended to help, we should expect synergistic rules. And then finally, since marriage is good and honorable, since marriage is by the decree of God good and honorable, we should expect sympathetic rules. Let me tell you what I mean by that. Marriage is honorable. It says in Hebrews 10 that marriage is to be honored. Therefore, it must be something that can be honored. Marriage is good. You know how this works in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. God created the world. He said in the case of every part of His creation, it's good, it's good, it's good. And then one thing was not good. It was not good for man to be alone. So He made a helper suitable for him. And the implication is that it was good for the man and the woman to be together. The woman coming to the man, the marriage being invented, made all of creation good. Marriage is a good thing, and it is an honorable thing, as it says in Hebrews. And so it should be good for people. And the Bible says that God knows our frame. He knows that we are but dust. He understands our basic weaknesses. And the laws of God are such that the people are helped by keeping them. So we should not expect the rules, simple and synergistic and unpopular though they be, to be hard on us. We should expect the rules to be easy to keep, the rules to do us good, the rules to be designed to our needs and in view of our weaknesses. And this, in fact, is what we will find. So with all of this in mind, armed with the fact that there needs to be some rules, there ought to be some rules, and they will not be popular, but they will be simple, that they will do us good and they will take into account our weaknesses and our frailties, let's look at the rules of marriage. And as my father taught me to say, ladies first. So let's go to Ephesians chapter 5 and look at the rules for marriage for wives. Ephesians chapter 5 is a standard text. I think we'll be returning to it in the weeks to come, but this is our first run at it. So I'm not intending to say everything there is to that I know to say about Ephesians 5. I'll try to say some other things later. But Ephesians chapter 5, one of the standard places of marriage, addresses wives. It borrows a verb. Verse 22 borrows a verb from the previous verse. That is, if you're reading New American Standard, you'll see that the verb in verse 22 is in italics because it's not actually there. It's implied from the previous verse. So speaking universally, speaking to all Christians, in verse 21, Paul says, and be subject to one another in the fear of Christ. And then he says, speaking to wives specifically, wives to your own husbands. And the verb be subject is implied from the previous verse, so there's a connection between how we are all to submit to one another and how wives are specifically to submit to their husbands, or to be subject to their husbands, as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ also is the head of the church, he himself being the Savior of the body. But as the church is subject to Christ, so also the wives ought to be to their husbands in everything. And then you leap down to verse 33, which says, in the second part, let the wife see to it that she respect her husband. And I'll just let you know that literally, that's the verb translated respect is the verb to fear. Let the wife see to it that she fear her husband. But the translators, with I think some wisdom, realized that our society is not willing to take the scriptures at their face value at this point, so softens the word fear down to respect to get basically the same idea. They do the same thing in other places where we are told to fear the Lord, and the modern translations change it to revere the Lord, because it's just a little hard for us to understand this fear. The word is fear in both cases, and you can work with that. But we'll say this, that the rules for the wives come down to one thing. This is the rule: submit to him. Submit to him. And if we take the parallel text in 1 Peter chapter 3 to see what's added to it, we'll only see that the same thing is given as a rule to wives regardless of the moral character of their husbands. For Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 3, you wives be submissive to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives. And Peter goes on to talk about what a frightening thing that is for a woman, to submit to a husband who is disobedient to the word. But that she should take heart and imitate Sarah, who called her husband Lord, and be submissive to their own husbands, and prove themselves to be the daughters or the children of Sarah, with the notion, with the conviction that God will care for people who risk their own well-being in order to obey God. And there's lots to be said about that, but we will keep it simple for tonight. The basic rule of marriage for a wife is to submit to her husband. Now you tell me, what is implied in that simple rule about men? What's being implied? And I hope you'll agree with me that the simple implication is men are such creatures that women do not naturally submit to them. Now the word submit is a military term. It means to rank yourself under. It means to gladly accept the fact that the other one is in charge. It's what sergeants do to captains, and captains do to majors, and majors do to generals. You rank yourself under. You say, oh, he's the commander, he's the one, he's the senior officer here, I'll do it his way. That's the thought behind the word submit. And the very fact that it is our rule of marriage tells us that men are not such creatures that women would naturally rank themselves inferior to. This is not something that would come naturally to women. If it was, women would not be commanded to do so. So the commandment also, the rule also implies something about women, and that is that they are not the sorts of people who naturally rank themselves below any particular man. These are the implications, aren't they? Let's live with those implications for a minute and go on to consider the rule for husbands. And we should still be in Ephesians 5 and 1 Peter 3, the same standard texts. And I think you know what it says to husbands, and it says it at much greater length, as if to put much greater weight on the subject, starting with verse 25. Husbands, love your wives. So the simple rule to husbands is love her. As the wife is commanded to submit to him, the husband is commanded, love her. And the apostle goes on and explains that love for your wife ought to imitate Christ's love for the church, and Christ loved the church with a sacrificial love, and with a sanctifying love, and with a nourishing love, and with a cherishing love. He loved the church with a love that made no great regard for the condition of the church. Though the church was unlovable, he loved her anyway. And in all these ways, a husband's love is to reflect the love that Christ has for all of us. Well, again, you can ask yourself the implications. What does the commandment to men tell you about men? It tells you that they naturally do not love their wives in a sacrificial, sanctifying, cherishing, nourishing way. This is not second nature to a man, or first nature. So it's something that has to be commanded, because the man can't be trusted to just naturally stumble into this kind of love. And perhaps the rule implies something about women as well, and that is that they are not naturally the sorts of people that men would love in a dying, sacrificial, sanctifying way. These are commandments because God did not expect us to naturally fall into this kind of behavior. When we go to 1 Peter 3 to get clarification or further details, we see a single verse to husbands with a simple thought. It says, 1 Peter 3:7, "You husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, as with a weaker vessel, since she is a woman, and grant her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered." And there's implications there that are important too. If husbands are commanded to live with their wives in an understanding way, then it must be that husbands don't naturally understand their wives. They don't naturally understand their wives, and so are commanded to strive to be understanding. And if men are commanded to grant their wives honor, then it must be that men are such creatures that they don't naturally grant honor to women. It's not in their makeup to do so, and so they are commanded to do so. And if there's implications for women here, the implications are that women generally defy men's ability to understand their behavior. Women transcend a man's comprehension, and women are difficult to honor. This is the implication. So men are commanded to get on with the work which is important. But I see these as simple commandments. They're amplified here. It comes down to one rule per person. Wives are given this rule by which a marriage fails or succeeds: submit to him. And husbands are given this one rule by which a marriage fails or succeeds: love her. And what I want to show you now is the synergism and the simplicity and the sympathy in these unpopular rules. Now, no doubt about it, these are unpopular rules. In fact, anybody who is in the business of marrying couples, and so taking couples through pre-marriage Bible study, will see how often the whole idea of rules by which the marriage is to operate are unpopular. And it's not usually the one commandment which is unpopular. The idea of a husband loving his wife is usually very popular in the premarital stage, but the other rule runs into difficulties with both men and women who see it as an antiquated, outdated, and irrelevant sort of commandment. And yet we trust the Lord more than to leave us with old, outdated rules. We ought to see some sympathy. We ought to see some reason for the rules. And I'd say the rules are right can be seen to be right when we consider the needs that a man and the needs that a woman enter marriage with, and then when we consider the weaknesses with which a man enters marriage and the weaknesses with which a woman enters marriage. So let's look at these together. Based on the commandment to a husband, love your wife as Christ loves the church. Can you guess what the basic need of a woman would be? Well, you don't need the commandment to get it. You could figure this out anyway. If you know anything about women, and I don't think women would be insulted to say that the basic need that a woman enters a marriage to have addressed is the need to be loved. This is a basic need. The way God made women, they need to be loved. Their desire to be loved, and put in brackets, by a good man, their desire to be loved by a good man is such that they will run to great risks to have that need met. And marriage is often seen by a woman as a risk that she's willing to run in order to have this basic need met, the need to be loved by a good man. Women need a man's love. They don't need words of affection. They don't need flowers sent on cue. They don't need good sex. These are not the basic needs. The need transcends all those things, though those things may be expressions of the love, but what they need is the sacrificial, unwavering, faithful love of a committed man. So I strive to simplify the idea and put into some sort of graphic illustration, some sort of word picture, what it is the woman is needing. I've never been a woman, although I know a few. So let me try to give you an idea of what the whole thing can be summarized with. Let's say it this way. A woman needs a hug. All that a woman expects from a man can be symbolized in the meaning that a woman reads into a hug. That is, she needs a strong pair of masculine arms around her, embracing her, protecting her, guarding her, supporting her, warming her. She is looking for a hug with all that it symbolizes. And immediately we run into the problem which is at the root of many marriage difficulties. Because if a woman were to tell a man, what I need is a hug, and she knows what she means by that, the man is likely to misunderstand. For to a man, a hug is a simple little gesture, a little courtesy. He hugs his mom when he's finished visiting with her. He hugs his dog if the dog brings the bone back. A hug is a meaningless little gesture which you might confer upon anyone. Besides that, a hug is a sexual embrace. A hug is a, hey, baby, kind of gesture. So when the woman says, what I need is a hug, she's bound to be misunderstood. For what she wants is nurture and care and protection and support, and the man is likely to misunderstand what it is she's even asking for. What's really important to understand as you try to analyze the needs behind the rules is that the needs of a man are not like the needs of a woman, and the needs of a woman are not like the needs of a man. They are different because men and women are different. And that's why the rules are different. A man is commanded to love his wife because the wife's basic need is to be loved. God is addressing in sympathy to the woman's basic need when he commands the husband to love his wife. On the other hand, the wife is commanded to quite a different obedience. And I'm not going to be so simplistic as to say that his basic need is to be submitted to. I think there's something beyond submission, which comes out in the last verse of chapter 5 of Ephesians. The man's basic need, the need which he marries to have addressed, is the need to be respected. Or feared is the biblical word, but I won't put it in such extreme terms because it's hard for us to catch on to the meaning. The husband's basic need is to be respected by a good woman. But the way a woman expresses her respect is to submit to him. It's a military term. Now, men think about military things. Men as boys play with guns and swords and imagine going off to war. They imagine being valiant warriors, taking on the world and conquering it for good or for bad, depending on what kind of boys they are. They imagine going into battle with other soldiers all around them, being in charge of a large operation. And they imagine having at their right hand a fellow soldier that they couldn't do without. They imagine going into battle heroically and having beside them a man that they couldn't do without. And the boy imagines that when he gets into the toughest battle point and he comes up with a plan that's going to save the day, he says to his most faithful partner, here's what we need to do. We need to crawl down this trench and go over that barbed wire, and we need to go over this fence and go down there, and then we're going to ambush him and we're going to get him. And he wants his most faithful companion to say, yes, sir, let's do it. We'll do it your way, and it'll be just right. That sort of respect is the respect that a man looks for from a woman who he sees as his lifetime companion and the one that God has brought to him to help him. So he does not look for a hug. He does not want to be embraced and nurtured and cared for and supported. He wants to be respected. He wants to be saluted. He wants someone that he has a tremendous amount of respect for himself to show a tremendous amount of respect for him by saying, yes, sir, let's do it your way. You're in charge and you're competent to lead. Now, a woman hears all that, and she says, what's that, all that silly soldier stuff again? You've been watching too many Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. A woman can't be expected to understand that. But then a woman is not a man, and therein is the problem. The commandments imply that women don't find men naturally respectable. A woman's reaction to the whole of a man's being is not such that the woman thinks to say, good idea, let's do it your way. On the contrary, a woman's temperament being what it is and men being what they are, a woman is more likely to say, I got a few questions about your ideas. But by saying that, by raising questions about a man's idea, she is conveying to him a lack of respect in his ability to lead. And all over the world, there are men who have abdicated their responsibilities and don't even bother trying to lead their families or their societies or their churches. And one of the reasons for that is that they lack confidence. And one of the reasons they lack confidence to lead is that they don't have a really good woman spurring them on to greatness. And that old cliche is entirely true that says behind every great man there's a woman who believed in him. There's a lot of comical ways to distort that expression and to show the cynicism that is a part of our society. But a man cannot, or hardly is capable, of any level of greatness if he doesn't have some woman telling him he's capable. And as a young boy, a young boy is capable of striving for excellence if his mother will cheer him on. And then the wife takes the place of the mother as the woman that he has a tremendous amount of respect for, who gives him a tremendous amount of confidence by saying, good idea. Let's do it your way. A man has a very clearly recognized appetite for respect from his wife. And every one of you married women can test this week by simply choosing to flatter him in regard to anything he does or anything he is. Just watch. One day when he comes down to work, if he wears a tie to work, say, ooh, I like that tie. And watch the next time he wears it. He probably won't take it off at night. If he does, he'll put it on the next day. If he goes out to shovel the driveway and comes back in and you say, "Ooh, nice job," he'll probably go out and shovel it again before it even snows again, just because it feels so good to have you affirm his actions. And you'll need to be careful with this if you're not in the pattern of flattering him or respecting him. You'll give it all away, and then he'll never believe you. And that will be a real problem. Because what he needs from you, his basic need from a woman, is the confidence that comes from her respect. And the proper way to show a man respect is to submit to him. Now, you've got to understand, women, that men are not like you. They are very different. Submitting to another woman does not give the woman the sense of fulfillment that it gives a man. So you can't try this out on your sister or your girlfriends and see if it works before you try it on a man, because the reaction would not be the same. In the same way, men, that it works the same way. A friend's response to your support is not like a woman's response to your support, to your hug. A man's response, a woman's response is a very different thing. One of the reasons is that the needs are very different, and that's built into the very fabric of the marriage by the rules. And then the other reason why it works so powerfully and why marriage depends so much upon the rules is seen from a view of the weaknesses of the marriage. So let's drop right down. You're under the second column, husbands to be respected. Let's go straight down and consider the weaknesses of the husband and then the wife, which explain the rules as well. What's a husband's basic weakness in terms of undermining the marriage, in terms of making a marriage an incompatible mess? Well, husbands are commanded to love their wives with a sacrificial, a dying kind of love that resembles Christ's willingness to die on the cross. And men aren't very good at doing that, because that cuts right at the very core of their basic weakness. And in view of the effectiveness or success of a marriage, a husband's basic weakness is his self-centeredness. A man really has a hard time thinking about anybody other than himself. When Carly Simon sang that song about Warren Beatty, you walked into the room, you looked in the mirror, she could have meant anybody. There's a controversy about that song. Which man did she mean? It doesn't matter. Men are self-centered by temperament. A man may say, apart from the grace of God, a man may say that he wants peace in the home, but really all he wants is to be left alone to read the paper and watch the sports. He may say that he's got the good of the family in mind. But in the final analysis, apart from the grace of God, men only want a few things. They want good food, they want good sex, and a full-time Molly maid. This is what men are like. This is not pretty. This is why marriages fail from the man's perspective. There's this dogged, down-to-the-core self-centeredness by which a man serves himself and is perhaps willing to give a woman what she wants if he can get from her what he wants. This is sin in the highest standard. It's a weakness which men bring to a marriage and which threatens the marriage. But the solution to it is obedience to God. For the man is commanded to leave his self-centeredness behind and to love someone with a love which is willing to pour out a life towards, a love which is a model of Christ's, which is modeled by Christ's love for the church. When God gives the one commandment to the husband, love your wife, he's not only addressing the wife's basic need, but he's addressing the man's basic weakness. And both the woman's need and the man's weakness are addressed by the man's willingness to obey God and by God's ability to give that man the capacity to obey him. When the man begins to love his wife with this sacrificial love, his weakness and her need both are addressed. And then similarly, as the woman takes on the obedience to the simple rule and so meets her husband's need to be respected as expressed through her submission to him, her basic weakness is addressed. And it would stand to reason, you can work the thing logically through. The woman's basic weakness is not self-centeredness. And I think that's very true. You can see that all around you. Women are not naturally self-centered. Women are naturally self-giving. Women pour their lives out for their husbands, then they pour their lives out for their children, and they often end their lives totally poured out. They're exhausted and they're empty. They've given themselves to their children, they've given themselves to the husband to their own detriment, to their own destruction. That's what women are like. Women do that. But a woman has a weakness which also contributes to the damage or the demise of a marriage, and it's directly addressed by the command to respect him through submission. And so we can see what the weakness is. The weakness is rebellion. And you could say in a way that this sinful weakness is something that women come to honestly, for they have inherited from their first mother, Eve. And the story of how women became rebellious I mean specifically rebellious towards men who seek to exercise authority over them, is a part of the Garden of Eden story and revealed in Genesis chapter 3, verse 16. And if you have your Bible, you should turn with me to it, because the details of this verse are very important to see. Men, if you want to live with your wives in an understanding way, you need to see them as daughters of Eve, as inheritors of the curse pronounced upon women, as you yourself are a son of Adam and an inheritor of the curse upon him. But to the woman, in Genesis chapter 3, verse 16, after making childbirth a matter of multiple pain, in pain you shall bring forth children, God says this in regard to marriage: your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Now this is a pronouncement upon this particular woman, and we understand it from its pivotal place in Scripture as a curse upon all humanity. The curse that God pronounced upon all women from this day on was this: your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. And if you only had that verse and you had to figure it out, you would be at a loss to know what that means, for it's not clear exactly what the curse means. Your desire shall be for your husband. Some would say, well, it means that from thereafter the woman would have this kind of affection for her husband, which leads her into all kinds of abuse. And that may be true, but I don't think that's the meaning of the verse. There's other ways of interpreting it that you would get from simply looking at that verse and guessing what it means: your desire shall be for your husband. There's a number of ways of interpreting it which would mean it not to be a curse at all, and yet quite clearly from the context it is a curse. I think the key to understanding the phrase in Genesis 3:16 comes from reading on to Genesis 4:7 and seeing the sons of Adam and Eve in their conflict with one another. Cain and Abel were in the difficulty that they're well known for, and the Lord said to Cain, the hateful, murderous brother, in verse 6, why are you angry and why has your countenance fallen? And then in Genesis 4:7, if you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. And here sin is personified as a burglar or a lion or some sort of beast that's about to leap into the room to the destruction of the people in the room. And then the Lord says in regard to sin crouching at the door, its desire is for you, but you must master it. And the words in the Hebrew translated, its desire is for you, but you must master it, are identical to the words in verse 16 of chapter 3. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall master you. He shall rule over you. It's the very same verbs moved over into the same context. And it helps us to understand it. Because what was sin trying to do to Cain? Whatever it was that sin was trying to do to Cain, that's what Eve, by the curse of God, would try to do for her husband. Well, what was sin trying to do to Cain? It was trying to grab him and to conquer him and to have and take full control of him. That's what sin wanted to do. That's a personification or a metaphor by which we're told that Satan was involved in the conflict between Cain and Abel and was trying to get Cain to be thoroughly given over to sin. So sin was trying to conquer and master and control Cain. And the curse in Genesis 3:16 is that women would be programmed forever after. Women would be inclined to have the same desire for their husband, which means that built into the very sinful fabric of a woman's temperament is a desire to get the better of her husband, to take over the authority of the marriage, to take over the household as the one in charge. And a woman has a number of ways of doing that. And men in the self-centeredness often step aside and let the woman do it, since they don't really want to take responsibility for anything anyway. But if a man is serious about taking his proper place of responsibility as the head of his wife, and then as part of the head of the household, he will have in the very sinful nature of the woman he married this competition. The woman will try to take over. And the insidious, suicidal thing about this is a woman will hate every man who lets her do this, yet will try all the more relentlessly to do so. She'll hate the man that lets her take over. She will despise him, for he has defaulted at her own doing. But nonetheless, she has these capacities. And the second half of the curse, you see, he shall rule over you, lines up with what God said to Cain about sin. You must master it. Sin is going to try to get the best of you, but you must take it by the throat and control it. You must get it under control. So rather than the husband loving his wife and leading her in a sacrificial Christ-like love, the husband finds himself in the position of needing to suppress the woman, needing to put her down, needing to control her position and back her into a corner where she'll behave herself. This is no one's idea of a good time. This is a destructive tendency as well. It's the backlash that is inherent in the man because of the sin that is in the woman. Man inherited this great self-centeredness, which makes him unable to be a good husband, and woman inherited this rebellion, which makes it unlikely that he will ever rise to the occasion. And God, by these simple rules, wives, submit to your husbands, husbands, love your wife, addresses in both cases the needs of the woman and the man, and the weaknesses of the woman and the man. And that is why a marriage flies a spiral path toward heaven or toward hell. A marriage cannot stand still. It just can't. The relationship between a man and a woman is too close to home, is too loaded down with implications, is too interconnected with the weaknesses and the needs of a person to ever really get into neutral. A marriage is always either getting better and better or worse and worse. Let's be happy. It gets better and better as though husband's love for his wife increases her respect for him. Who would a woman respect? Who would a woman naturally look up to? Other than a man who shows by his consistent sacrificial love that he is worthy of her respect, that he's not a risk to respect. So the more loving a husband can be, the more respectful the woman will be. Well, what happens when a woman respects her husband and submits to him and admires his work and flatters his shoveling and his tie? He loves her all the more. Why would he not love a woman who supplies this most basic need? Even if the man doesn't recognize it as a need, it's there. There's something that feels wonderfully right about his wife respecting him. And as he's motivated by that respect, he thinks, what a great woman. Boy, this woman, I mean, she's got a great taste in men. She likes me. And he's spurred on to love her even more. Well, as he loves her all the more, what happens? She respects him all the more, and the marriage gets better and better. And I think I know something about a marriage that just gets richer and richer as time goes on. As your needs are addressed by a person that you care a lot about, you're motivated to care about her. And a marriage, on the other hand, can fly a spiral path downward. It can't stand still. If the husband is failing to love his wife, it decreases the woman's respect for him. And if she ceases to respect him, she will act more and more discourteous towards him, less and less admiring him, which will make him love her less and less. And as he loves her less and less, it'll just get worse. So marriage gets worse and worse and worse. And a marriage normally can experience this in little ways as it goes up and down. You have a couple bad weeks, and then you have a couple good weeks, and then a couple bad weeks. Well, hopefully it's getting better and better in the long run. But you could look at the big picture and see that a marriage is going to disintegrate to become a very bitter kind of stalemate. It could be shifted into neutral by outward appearances, but all the time getting more and more angry and more hurtful on the inside. Or a marriage can be a glorifying thing that makes the people more and more loving towards one another and stronger people all the time. A marriage can't stand still. It will go one direction or the other. And the issue over which it spirals upward or downward is a simple issue of obedience to the simple, synergistic, sympathetic rules by which God governs a marriage. You may think that there are few things that make a marriage good, but you're barking up the wrong tree if those few things are, weekends away, or remembering anniversaries, or going for walks in the rain, or doing romantic things in the spur of the moment, unless those things have anything to do with a wife respecting and a husband loving each other. Those are the things. Those two rules are the standards and the means by which a marriage succeeds or fails. And I would encourage you to see marriage as that simple a relationship and get on with making your marriage better and better. So there, I'm finished, and we have time for discussion, comments, or questions. Jennifer.
First, you said something about your rebellion.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering, is never getting around to marriage and all these rebellion?
Oh, it would be hard to answer that. For a number of reasons, it would be hard to answer that. And I said last week that the way we go about getting into marriages is so contrary to biblical standards that I would have to allow for all kinds of irregularities in the patterns that don't have necessarily anything to do with character weakness. But obviously, you're onto something. You're seeing a possibility. Sure, it could be that what keeps some men from ever getting married is their understanding of marriage and their unwillingness to pay the price, loving a woman that way. And similarly, what would keep many women from marriage is a sound understanding of what marriage entails and a refusal to play by the rules. And I would say, to the credit of a person who is that insightful, if you're not willing to play the game according to the rules, just stay off the court. It's not going to be nice for anybody. And my appeal would be, see it as that simple a game. See it as a matter of two participants with one rule each. And the marriage rises or falls on that. You had a second question?
Yeah, okay. It sounds like part of what you're saying is that we'd be better off if we didn't educate our women, our little girls, that, so that they could more easily say, yes, sir, and whatever you say, dear, and I have no ideas on that. I really haven't thought that one through. I haven't been through that myself, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, obviously, the more ignorant the women are, the easier it is for them to obey God.
Couldn't disagree with you more. And you'll be glad to know that. I think what you got to understand is a few things. One is that no man really knows what he's doing. So when the woman says, "You're the husband, let's do it your way," he will be so helped by that and so feeling so good about that he'll really warm up to the whole idea of taking headship of the marriage. But he'll be, painfully aware of what he may not have ever admitted before, and that is he doesn't really know what to do anyway. So what's he going to do? Well, he's going to turn to someone he respects and say, "Well, what do you think we should do?" And a woman will have, I think, all else being equal, every opportunity for input in a marriage with a man who respects her, and his respect for her is largely dependent upon her willingness to respect him. I don't see that it works that way. I don't know marriages where the more the woman submits to the husband, the less the husband cares about what the woman's thinking. I think quite the opposite. The women who don't get much attention from their husbands are the women who show so little respect for their husbands that their husbands are debilitated into even having any notion of getting on with life. So I think no advantage to the woman's ignorance. On the contrary, great advantages to a woman having knowledge and wisdom. Surely she will be called upon for it by a husband who is happy in the marriage. Linda.
So then am I correct in assuming that the respect that we show our husbands is based on the position of authority rather than on the performance of the man?
Yes. Although in a happy state of things, there would not be a discrepancy between the two. And how are you going to get your husband to the place? Not you. How are you going to get your husband to the place? I don't know any actual married people, so I was talking theoretically. The way a woman would get her husband to the place of being able to do that is by spurring him on to the position. And